Dr. Jake Thompson had always loved the ocean. As a marine scientist working at the remote Pacific Research Center, he spent most nights alone, studying sea creatures and their mysterious behaviors. The research station sat on a small island, far from any city lights, where the stars shone brighter than anywhere else on Earth. It was past midnight on a Tuesday when everything changed forever. Jake was looking through his microscope, examining some unusual algae samples he had collected earlier that day. The ocean outside was calm, with gentle waves lapping against the rocks. Below his laboratory window, then suddenly, the entire room, filled with the most beautiful blue light he had ever seen. At first, Jake thought it might be some kind of rare bioluminescent bloom in the water. He had seen glowing plankton before, but nothing quite like this. The light was so bright it made the inside of his lab look like daylight, curious and excited. Jake rushed to the window and looked out at the ocean. What he saw made his heart skip a beat. There, floating just beneath the surface of the water, was something that definitely did not belong on Earth. It looked like a giant crystal, about the size of a small house, glowing with that same incredible blue light. Jake rubbed his eyes, thinking he must be seeing things. He had been working long hours lately, and maybe his mind was playing tricks on him. But when he looked again, the strange object was still there, and now it was rising slowly out of the water. As the crystal ship emerged completely from the ocean, Jake could see that it was not made of any material he recognized. It seemed to be alive somehow, pulsing with energy and changing colors from blue to silver to gold. Water poured off its smooth surface like liquid diamonds. Jake stood frozen at his window, his scientific mind racing with questions while his human instincts told him to run and hide. But before he could decide what to do, something even more incredible happened. A door or opening appeared in the side of the crystal ship, and out stepped the most amazing being Jake had ever seen. She was tall, much taller than any human, probably about 7 feet. Her skin seemed to glow with a soft, pearl-like light, and her hair moved as if she was underwater, even though she was standing in the air. But it was her eyes that took Jake's breath away. They looked like liquid starlight, constantly shifting and sparkling with intelligence that seemed older than time itself. She wore flowing robes that changed color like her ship, and she moved with a grace that made her seem like she was floating, rather than walking. The being looked directly at Jake through his laboratory window, and somehow he knew she could see him clearly. Instead of feeling afraid, Jake felt strangely calm. There was something about her presence that made him feel safe, even though he was looking at something that should not exist. Without thinking, Jake opened the door of his laboratory and stepped outside onto the small dock. The night air was warm and still, and the ocean stretched out endlessly in all directions. The crystal ship hovered silently about 20 feet away from him, casting its magical light across the water. The tall being gracefully descended from her ship and walked across the water's surface, as if it were solid ground. As she came closer, Jake could see that she was even more beautiful and otherworldly than he had first thought. Her face was kind but serious, and there was something about her expression that reminded him of a mother who was deeply worried about her child. When she was just a few feet away from Jake, she stopped and looked at him with those incredible, starlight eyes. Then something amazing happened that Jake would remember for the rest of his life. Without speaking a single word, she somehow put thoughts and images directly into his mind. Jake suddenly understood that she was not from Earth. Her people lived on a planet far away among the stars, and they were in terrible trouble. Their world was dying, and they were looking for a new home. But more importantly, she needed his help with something urgent and personal. Through the mental connection they now shared, Jake saw images of her world. It had once been beautiful, with crystal cities and floating gardens, but now it was dark and broken. Her people, who called themselves the Zephyrians, were peaceful and highly advanced, but their planet had been destroyed by war and environmental damage. The being, who Jake somehow knew was a queen among her people, showed him more images. He saw other Zephyrian ships hidden deep in Earth's oceans, waiting and watching. They had been studying humans for a long time, trying to decide if Earth could be a safe place for both species to live together. But then the Queen showed Jake why. She had come to him tonight, from somewhere within her flowing robes. She carefully brought out a small figure that made Jake's heart melt immediately. It was a child. Clearly her child, but unlike anything he had ever seen. The little one was about the size of a human 5-year-old, with the same glowing skin as its mother, but much dimmer, like a candle that was almost burned out. Its eyes were closed, and it seemed very weak and sick. The child's breathing was shallow, and Jake could see that it was in serious trouble. The Queen gently held her child out toward Jake, and through their mental connection, he understood what she was asking. This was not just a meeting between two different species. This was a test, the most important test of his life. The Queen needed to know if humans could be trusted with the most precious thing in her world, her child's life. She had been watching Jake for weeks, studying his work with sea creatures, seeing how gently he handled even the smallest fish, how he cared for the injured animals he found on the beach. Jake looked at the sick child in the Queen's arms and felt something deep inside his chest. It was the same feeling he got when he found an injured dolphin or a bird with a broken wing. It did not matter that this little one was from another world. It was a child who needed help, and Jake knew he could not turn away. With trembling hands, Jake reached out and carefully took the alien child from its mother. The little one was surprisingly light, and its skin felt warm and soft, almost like touching a gentle electric current. As soon as Jake held the child close to his chest, it opened its eyes for just a moment, and Jake saw the same starlight quality as its mother's eyes, but smaller and dimmer. The Queen watched Jake's every move, her ancient mind analyzing his thoughts and emotions. Jake could feel her presence in his mind, testing his intentions, measuring his capacity for kindness and sacrifice. He held the child closer and felt a strange connection form between them, as if the little one was somehow reading his heart. Then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, the Queen began to back away toward the water. Jake started to follow her, wanting to ask a million questions. But she held up her hand to stop him. Through their mental link, she sent him one final message that filled his mind with both terror and purpose. The child's life was now in his hands. He had to find a way to save it, to prove that humans were worthy of trust and friendship. If he succeeded, it would change everything for both their species. If he failed, the Zephyrians would leave Earth forever, and humanity would lose its chance to learn from a people who could help heal their dying planet. Without another word, the Queen turned and walked back across the water to her crystal ship. Jake stood on the dock, holding an alien child, watching as the ship slowly sank back beneath the waves until only darkness remained. The ocean was quiet again, but Jake's world had changed forever. He looked down at the small being in his arms, feeling the weight of an entire species' future resting on his shoulders. The child's breathing was getting weaker, and Jake knew he did not have much time. As he carried the alien child into his laboratory, Jake realized that his quiet life as a marine scientist was over. He was now responsible for something far greater than any research project he had ever worked on. He had to save this child, not just because his mother had asked him to, but because he already loved the little one as if it were his own. The test had begun, and Jake had no idea how he was going to pass it. But as he looked at the trusting face of the alien child, he knew he would do whatever it took to keep it safe and healthy. The future of two worlds now depended on the choices he would make in the coming days. The first night with the alien child was the longest night of Jake's life. He had set up a makeshift bed in his laboratory using soft towels and blankets, trying to make the little one as comfortable as possible. But nothing seemed to help. The child's breathing was getting weaker by the hour, and its beautiful glowing skin was becoming dimmer and dimmer. Jake sat beside the small bed, watching every breath the child took. He had given it water, tried offering different types of food, and even attempted to take its temperature, but nothing worked the way it should. This was not a human child, and Jake was beginning to realize that everything he knew about caring for living beings might be useless here. The child would sometimes open its starlight eyes and look at Jake with such trust that it broke his heart. Even though it was clearly suffering, the little one never cried or complained. Instead, it would reach out with its tiny hand and touch Jake's fingers, as if trying to comfort him. Instead of asking for comfort. By morning, Jake was exhausted and desperate. He had spent the entire night reading every book he had about marine biology, hoping to find some clue about what the child might need. The queen had appeared from the ocean, so maybe her people were somehow connected to sea life. But all his research led nowhere. That's when Jake noticed something strange. Whenever he brought a glass of regular tap water near the child, nothing happened. But when he had collected some fresh seawater earlier and brought it close, the child's eyes would open and it would try to reach toward the container. Jake's scientific mind began to work. Maybe the child needed something that was in ocean water, but not in regular water. He knew that seawater contained many different minerals and elements that fresh water did not have. Perhaps the child's body required these special minerals to survive. Excited by this possibility, Jake carefully lifted the child and carried it outside to the edge of the research station's dock. The morning sun was just rising, casting golden light across the calm ocean. Jake dipped his hand in the seawater and then gently touched a drop to the child's lips. The reaction was immediate and amazing. The child's eyes opened wider than Jake had seen before, and its skin began to glow just a little brighter. It was working, but Jake quickly realized that just a few drops would not be enough. The child needed more, much more. Over the next few days, Jake developed a routine. Every few hours, he would take the child to the ocean and let it soak its hands and feet in the natural seawater. Each time he did this, the child would become a little stronger and its glow would return for a short while. But the effect never lasted long, and Jake knew he needed to find a better solution. The real problem was that Jake could not let anyone else know about the child. The research station was supposed to be visited by other scientists later in the week, and Jake had no idea how he would explain an alien child living in his laboratory. He started making excuse after excuse, telling his supervisor over the radio that he was conducting important experiments that could not be interrupted. But the lies were getting harder to maintain. Dr. Lisa Chen, his colleague from the mainland, had been trying to reach him for days. She was supposed to bring supplies and check on his research progress. Jake knew that if Lisa showed up and found the alien child, everything would be ruined. Meanwhile, the child was getting stronger, but also more active. Jake had started calling it Echo because it had begun copying the sounds he made. When Jake would hum while working, Echo would hum the same tune. When Jake said hello, Echo would repeat the word in its small, musical voice. But Echo was much more than just a child who could copy sounds. Jake began to notice that Echo had abilities that no human child possessed. One morning, Jake had accidentally cut his hand while preparing Echo's seawater bath. Echo saw the blood and immediately reached out to touch Jake's injured hand. What happened next left Jake speechless. A warm, tingling sensation spread from Echo's touch, and when the child pulled its hand away, Jake's cut was completely healed. There was not even a scar left behind. Echo looked up at Jake with those starlight eyes and smiled, as if healing people was the most natural thing in the world. Echo also seemed to understand Jake's emotions in ways that were impossible for a normal child. When Jake felt worried or sad, Echo would crawl over to him and place its small hand on Jake's chest, sending waves of calm and peace through his entire body. It was like having a living, breathing source of comfort and healing. But the most incredible thing about Echo was the dreams. Every night when Jake slept, he began having vivid dreams that he somehow knew were coming from Echo's mind. In these dreams, Jake saw Echo's home world before it was destroyed. He saw crystal cities floating among the clouds, gardens filled with plants that glowed like stars, and Zephyrian people living in perfect harmony with their environment. The dreams also showed Jake why Echo's people were so desperate to find a new home. Their planet had been beautiful once, but wars and pollution had turned it into a dark, dying world. The Zephyrians were not conquerors looking to take over Earth. They were refugees. families with children, just trying to find a safe place to rebuild their lives through the dreams. Jake learned that there were other Zephyrian ships hidden deep in Earth's oceans, waiting to see if humans could be trusted. Echo's mother, the Queen, was their leader, and she had taken an enormous risk by leaving her child with Jake. If anything happened to Echo, the other Zephyrians would assume that humans were danger, and they would leave Earth forever. As the days passed, Jake's bond with Echo grew stronger. The little one followed him everywhere around the laboratory, always curious about his work. Echo seemed especially fascinated by Jake's research on sea creatures, and would often point at pictures of fish and dolphins with excitement. But Jake's biggest challenge was still ahead of him. He had managed to keep Echo healthy with regular seawater treatments, but he knew this was only a temporary solution. Echo needed something more specific, something that would help it not just survive, but truly thrive on Earth. The answer came to Jake in one of his shared dreams with Echo. He saw the Queen diving deep into the darkest parts of the ocean, collecting water from underwater vents where special minerals bubbled up from the Earth's core. This was what Echo truly needed, not just any seawater, but water enriched with rare minerals from the deepest parts of the ocean. Jake realized he would have to take Echo on a dangerous journey to the deepest part of the ocean near his research station. It would require using the station's small submarine, something he had never done alone before. But Echo was getting weaker again, and Jake knew they were running out of time. The night before their planned deep-sea journey, Jake sat with Echo on the dock, looking up at the stars. Echo pointed at different constellations and made soft musical sounds, as if it was trying to show Jake which star was its original home. "Don't worry, little one," Jake whispered, holding Echo close. "Tomorrow we'll find what you need. I promise. I won't let anything happen to you." Echo looked up at Jake with complete trust and placed its small hand over Jake's heart. In that moment, Jake felt a connection stronger than anything he had ever experienced. This was no longer just about passing the Queen's test. Echo had become the most important thing in Jake's world, and he would do whatever it took to keep the child safe and healthy. But as Jake carried Echo back to the laboratory, he had no idea that their peaceful days together were about to end. Unknown to him, government satellites had detected the unusual energy patterns around his research station, and people with very different intentions were already on their way. Jake woke up to the sound of helicopters. It was still dark outside, but the loud noise of rotor blades cutting through the air was getting closer and closer to his research station. He quickly sat up in bed, his heart racing with fear. This was not supposed to happen. No one ever came to his remote island at night. Echo was sleeping peacefully in the small bed Jake had made. But the sound of the helicopters made the little one stir and open those beautiful starlight eyes. Jake could see worry in Echo's face, and somehow the child seemed to understand that danger was coming. Jake rushed to the window and looked out at the dark ocean. In the distance, he could see bright searchlights sweeping across the water, and several large boats were heading straight toward his island. These were not research vessels or Coast Guard ships. They looked military, with dark hulls and no identifying marks. "We have to go, Echo," Jake whispered urgently, scooping the alien child into his arms. Right now, Jake had prepared for this moment ever since Echo had come into his life. He had packed a waterproof bag with supplies, including containers of the special mineral-rich seawater that Echo needed to stay healthy. He also grabbed his research notes and the communication device that Echo's mother had somehow left behind. As Jake and Echo slipped out the back door of the laboratory, Jake could hear the helicopters landing on the other side of the island. Men's voices were shouting orders, and powerful flashlights were beginning to search the area. Jake knew they had maybe 5 minutes before the soldiers would reach his laboratory and discover that he and Echo were gone. Jake carried Echo down a hidden path that led to a small cove where he kept an emergency boat. The path was rocky and difficult in the darkness, but Jake had walked it many times during his years at the research station. Echo clung to Jake's chest, staying perfectly quiet as if the child understood that making any sound could get them caught. Just as they reached the boat, Jake heard dogs barking in the distance. His heart sank. The soldiers had brought tracking dogs, which meant they would be able to follow Jake. And Echo sent no matter where they tried to hide on the island. "Hold on tight, little one," Jake whispered to Echo as he started the boat's engine. The small motor was not very powerful, but it was quiet, and Jake hoped they could get far enough away before anyone noticed they were gone. As they headed out into the dark ocean, Jake looked back and saw lights flooding his laboratory. The soldiers were searching everywhere, and Jake knew it would not be long before they realized he had escaped with Echo. But for now, they were safe on the open water. Echo seemed to love being on the ocean. The child's skin began to glow brighter as soon as they were surrounded by seawater, and Echo reached over the side of the boat to touch the waves with its small hands. The connection between Echo and the ocean was stronger than Jake had ever realized. For the next several hours, Jake navigated by the stars, heading toward a group of small islands where he hoped they could hide until he figured out what to do next. But Echo had other plans. The child began pointing in a different direction, toward a part of the ocean that looked empty and dark. Through their special mental connection, Echo started showing Jake new visions. These were not dreams about Echo's destroyed home world. These were images of Earth's oceans, showing Jake places he had never seen before. Deep underwater, Echo showed him massive crystal structures hidden in ocean trenches, so far down that no human had ever discovered them. Jake realized with amazement that Echo was showing him where the other Zephyrian ships were hiding. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all waiting silently in the deepest parts of Earth's oceans. The Zephyrians had been here much longer than Jake had imagined, watching and studying humanity while staying completely hidden. But the visions also showed Jake something that made his blood run cold. The military forces that were chasing them were not just looking for Echo. They had been tracking Zephyrian activity for months, using advanced technology to detect the energy signatures from the hidden ships. Colonel Hayes, the man leading the search, wanted to capture Echo not to hurt the child, but to use Echo as bait to force the other Zephyrians to reveal themselves. Echo's mother, the Queen, was in terrible danger. If the military captured Echo, they would threaten to harm the child unless the Queen surrendered herself and her technology. Jake understood now that this was not just about keeping one alien child safe. The future of an entire species was depending on him. As the sun began to rise, Jake and Echo found shelter in a small cave on an uninhabited island. Jake gave Echo some of the special seawater he had brought, and the child's strength returned quickly. But Jake could tell that Echo was worried about its mother and the other Zephyrians. That afternoon, while Echo was resting, Jake began to understand just how special the child really was. Echo was not just the Queen's offspring. The child was something much more important. Through their mental connection, Echo showed Jake that young Zephyrians like Echo were the key to their species' survival. Echo's generation had been born with the ability to adapt to new planets. While adult Zephyrians could visit other worlds, they could not permanently live anywhere except their original home. But children like Echo could bond with a new planet, changing their biology to match their new environment. This was why Echo needed the special minerals from Earth's oceans. The child was literally becoming part of Earth. Jake realized that Echo represented hope for both species. If Echo could successfully adapt to life on Earth, it would prove that Zephyrians and humans could share the same world. But if Echo failed to complete the adaptation process, the Zephyrians would have to keep searching the galaxy for a new home. The weight of this responsibility was overwhelming, but Jake was determined not to let Echo down. The child had already become like a son to him, and Jake would protect Echo no matter what the cost. That evening, as Jake and Echo sat on the beach watching the sunset, Echo suddenly became very excited. The child pointed toward the ocean and began making musical sounds that Jake had never heard before. At first, Jake could not see anything unusual, but then the water began to glow with that familiar blue light. Echo's mother was coming. The Queen's crystal ship rose slowly from the depths, more beautiful and magnificent than Jake remembered. But this time, she was not alone. Other ships appeared around her, creating a circle of glowing crystals floating on the dark water. Jake felt both relief and terror. He was happy that Echo would be reunited with its mother, but he also knew that the military forces were probably tracking them. If Colonel Hayes and his soldiers found this gathering of Zephyrian ships, it would be a disaster for everyone. The Queen stepped out of her ship and walked across the water toward the beach, where Jake and Echo were waiting. When she reached them, she knelt down and embraced her child, and Jake could feel the powerful love between mother and child, even without their telepathic connection. But when the Queen looked at Jake, her expression was serious and sad. Through their mental link, she showed him what was coming. The military had found them. Ships and helicopters were already on their way, and they would arrive within the hour. The Queen faced Jake with a choice that would change his life forever. She could take Echo and disappear back into the depths of the ocean, keeping her child safe but ending any hope of the two species living together. Or Jake could come with them, leaving his human life behind to help establish the first colony, where humans and Zephyrians could work together. Jake looked at Echo, who was watching him with those trusting starlight eyes. Then he looked at the Queen, whose ancient wisdom and desperate hope were clear in her face. In the distance, Jake could already hear the sound of approaching helicopters. The choice was simple, really. Jake had already given his heart to Echo, and he could not imagine a life without the child. If protecting Echo and helping the Zephyrians meant leaving everything he had ever known, then that was what he would do. "I'll come with you," Jake said aloud. Though he knew the Queen could read his decision in his thoughts, Echo is family now. "I won't abandon family." The Queen smiled for the first time since Jake had met her, and Echo hugged Jake tightly. But their reunion was interrupted by the roar of helicopters appearing over the horizon. The final confrontation was about to begin. The helicopters surrounded the small island like angry metal birds. Jake held Echo close to his chest as bright searchlights swept across the beach, turning night into harsh artificial day. The Queen stood protectively in front of them both, her tall figure glowing with an inner light that seemed to push back against the darkness. Colonel Hayes' voice boomed from a loudspeaker on one of the helicopters. "Dr. Thompson, we know you're down there. Come out with the alien specimen, and nobody gets hurt. You have 60 seconds to comply." Jake felt Echo trembling in his arms. The child's starlight eyes were wide with fear, but Echo was not afraid for itself. Through their mental connection, Jake could feel Echo's worry for its mother and for all the hidden Zephyrian ships. Beneath the ocean, the little one understood that this moment would decide the fate of both species. The Queen turned to Jake, her ancient eyes filled with both sadness and determination. Without speaking, she placed her hand on Jake's shoulder, and suddenly his mind was flooded with images and thoughts that were not his own. Jake saw the truth about what the military wanted. Colonel Hayes had been tracking Zephyrian energy signatures for over a year. Ever since the first scout ships had arrived near Earth, the government knew that an advanced alien species was hiding in the oceans, and they wanted that technology for themselves. But the military did not understand what they were dealing with. They thought the Zephyrians were invaders planning to take over Earth. They could not imagine that these beautiful beings were actually refugees, families with children who just wanted a safe place to live. The Queen showed Jake her plan. She would surrender herself to the humans, allowing them to capture her in exchange for Echo's freedom. It was the only way to protect her child and give the other Zephyrian families time to escape to another part of the galaxy. "No," Jake said out loud, surprising himself with the strength in his voice. "There has to be another way." But even as Jake spoke, he could see soldiers rappelling down from the helicopters onto the beach. They moved with military precision, surrounding the small group with weapons drawn. Jake had never felt so helpless in his entire life. Echo suddenly wiggled out of Jake's arms and walked toward the approaching soldiers. The child's skin began to glow brighter than Jake had ever seen before, and a strange humming sound filled the air. The soldiers stopped moving, their weapons lowering as they stared in amazement at the glowing alien child. Through Echo's glowing touch, every soldier on that beach suddenly understood what Jake had learned over the past weeks. They saw visions of the destroyed Zephyrian homeworld, felt the desperate hope of parents trying to save their children, and experienced the deep sadness of a people who had lost everything. Colonel Hayes landed his helicopter and stepped onto the beach, but he was not affected by Echo's power from that distance. He looked at the glowing child with cold calculation rather than wonder. "Fascinating," Hayes said, pulling out a strange device that looked like a cross between a gun and a scanner. "The specimen is even more advanced than our reports indicated. Imagine what we could learn from its biology, its technology." The Queen stepped forward, placing herself between Hayes and Echo. "My child is not a specimen," she said, speaking in perfect English for the first time. Her voice was like music, but there was steel underneath the melody. "Echo is the future of both our peoples." Hayes laughed. "Your people? You mean the aliens hiding in our oceans, using our resources, planning who knows what kind of invasion." Jake could not stay silent any longer. He moved to stand beside the Queen, his arm protectively around Echo. "You don't understand anything," Jake said. "They're not invaders. They're refugees. Their planet was destroyed, and they're just looking for a place where their children can be safe." "Dr. Thompson," Hayes said, "you've been compromised by exposure to alien influence. You can't think clearly anymore. Step away from the specimens so we can contain them properly." But Jake was thinking more clearly than he ever had in his life. He looked down at Echo, who was holding his hand with complete trust, and he knew what he had to do. "Echo isn't just any Zephyrian child," Jake announced to Hayes and all the soldiers. "Echo is the key to both our species surviving. The child can adapt to live on Earth permanently, something adult Zephyrians cannot do. If Echo succeeds, it proves that our two peoples can share this planet and help each other." Hayes raised his scanning device toward Echo, even more reason to study it thoroughly. "Think of the scientific advances, the military applications." The Queen's eyes flashed with anger, and Jake felt the temperature around them drop several degrees. The other Zephyrian ships began to rise from the ocean depths, their crystal hulls glowing with power that made the military helicopters look like toys. "You misunderstand the situation," the Queen said calmly. "We are not helpless refugees at your mercy. We have technology that could solve your planet's environmental problems, cure diseases that plague your people, and open doorways to the stars. But we will only share these gifts with those who prove they can be trusted." Jake realized that this entire situation had been another test. Just like when the Queen had first left Echo in his care, she was not just testing Jake anymore. She was testing all of humanity, represented by Colonel Hayes and his soldiers. Echo let go of Jake's hand and walked slowly toward Hayes. The child was no longer glowing, appearing small and vulnerable in front of the armed colonel. But Echo's eyes held a wisdom that seemed far too old for such a young being. "Please," Echo said in its musical voice, speaking English for the first time, "we only want to be friends." For a moment, Jake saw something change in Hayes' expression. The colonel looked down at Echo and seemed to see not an alien specimen, but a child asking for kindness. Jake held his breath, hoping that humanity might pass this test. But then Hayes raised his scanning device again. "Secure the specimens," he ordered his soldiers. "All of them." That was when everything changed. The Queen raised her hand, and every piece of military equipment on the beach simply stopped working. Helicopters landed gently on their own. Weapons became as harmless as toys, and communication devices went silent. But the Queen did not hurt anyone. She had simply demonstrated that the Zephyrians had power far beyond human understanding, and they had chosen not to use it against Earth's people. Jake felt Echo's small hand slip back into his, and through their mental connection, he understood what the child wanted him to do. This was Jake's moment to choose not just his own future, but the future of both species. Jake looked at Hayes, then at the confused soldiers, and finally at the Queen and her glowing ships. He thought about his quiet life as a marine scientist, about the safety and predictability he would be giving up. Then he looked down at Echo, whose starlight eyes were filled with hope and love. And Jake knew his choice had been made long ago. "I'm going with them," Jake announced, "not as a prisoner or a specimen, but as a bridge between our peoples. Echo has shown me what's possible when different species choose to trust each other instead of fear each other." The Queen smiled, and Jake felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with temperature. Echo hugged his leg tightly, and Jake knew that whatever came next, they would face it together as a family. But Hayes was not finished. As the Zephyrian ships prepared to depart, the Colonel made one final desperate attempt to capture Echo. What happened next would shock Jake in ways he never could have imagined. As Colonel Hayes lunged forward to grab Echo, something incredible happened that no one expected. Echo's small hand touched the Colonel's arm, and suddenly Hayes stopped moving completely. His eyes went wide with wonder instead of anger, and tears began streaming down his face. Jake watched in amazement as Echo's gentle touch showed Hayes the same visions that Jake had been seeing in his dreams. The Colonel saw the beautiful crystal cities of Echo's homeworld before they were destroyed. He felt the desperate love of Zephyrian parents trying to save their children. He experienced the deep sadness of losing everything and having to search the stars for a new home when Echo finally let go of Hayes' arm. The tough military colonel fell to his knees on the sand. "I'm sorry," he whispered, looking up at the Queen with tears in his eyes. "I didn't understand. We thought you were here to hurt us." The Queen knelt down beside Hayes and placed her hand gently on his shoulder. "Fear makes all beings do things they later regret," she said softly, "but understanding can heal even the deepest wounds." Jake felt his heart swelling with pride as he watched Echo bring peace to a situation that could have ended in disaster. This little alien child had just taught a room full of armed soldiers that love was stronger than fear. But the Queen was not finished with her surprises. She stood up and looked directly at Jake with those starlight eyes that seemed to see into his very soul. "Dr. Jake Thompson," she said, "it is time for you to learn the truth about why you were chosen." Jake felt a strange tingling sensation in his chest as the Queen approached him. Echo was smiling up at him with excitement, as if the child knew something wonderful was about to happen. "What do you mean, chosen?" Jake asked, though part of him already suspected that his meeting with Echo had not been random. The Queen placed both her hands on Jake's shoulders, and suddenly his mind was flooded with memories that were not his own. He saw a young man working at a marine research station 25 years ago. The man looked exactly like Jake, but older. He was Jake's father, Dr. Robert Thompson, who had died when Jake was just a child. "Your father was the first human to help our people," the Queen said gently. 25 years ago, when I was just a young Zephyrian scout, my ship was damaged in a storm. Your father found me on the beach, injured and alone. Instead of calling his government or trying to capture me, he helped heal my wounds and kept me safe until my people could find me." Jake stared at the Queen in shock. His father had never told him about meeting aliens. But then again, his father had died when Jake was only 9 years old, and there were many things they had never had time to talk about. But that's not all. The Queen continued, her voice filled with gentle excitement. "Your father and I formed a connection during those days. Not romantic love, but something deeper. A bond between two souls who recognize each other across the vastness of space." Echo tugged on Jake's shirt and looked up at him with those beautiful starlight eyes. Through their mental connection, Echo showed Jake the most shocking truth of all. Jake was not entirely human. During the time when his father had helped the Queen, their connection had changed Jake's father in ways that were passed down to his son. Jake carried Zephyrian DNA in his blood, making him a bridge between both species even before he had met Echo. "That's why you could understand Echo so easily," the Queen explained. "That's why the seawater treatments worked when you tried them. That's why you could share dreams and feel emotional connections with my child. You are part of both our worlds." Jake felt his knees go weak as the full meaning hit him. Echo was not just an alien child he had learned to love. Echo was his cousin, his family, connected to him by bonds that went deeper than species. "But wait," Jake said, his scientific mind racing. "If I'm part Zephyrian, does that mean?" The Queen smiled, and Jake knew she could read his thoughts. "Yes, Dr. Thompson. You can come with us not as a guest, but as one of our own people, and more than that. You can return to Earth whenever you choose. You will be our first ambassador, helping both species learn to trust each other. Echo clapped its small hands with joy and hugged Jake tightly. Through their connection, Jake felt the child's excitement about having a family member who could help bridge the gap between humans and Zephyrians. But the biggest surprise was still coming. The Queen gestured toward her crystal ship, and Jake saw other figures emerging from its glowing interior. They were children, all of them, and all of them looked like Echo with their glowing skin and starlight eyes. Echo is not my only child, the Queen said with a proud smile. These are the children of our people, the first generation born with the ability to adapt to new worlds. They have been waiting to meet their new family member. Jake watched in wonder as a dozen alien children ran across the water toward the beach. They surrounded him and Echo, chattering in their musical language and touching his hands with curiosity and affection. Jake realized that he was not just gaining one alien child as family. He was becoming part of an entire community of beings who had been preparing for this moment for decades. Colonel Hayes, still kneeling on the sand, looked up at the Queen with newfound respect. "What do you need from us?" he asked. "How can humanity help your people?" The Queen smiled at him with genuine warmth. "Start by protecting the oceans," she said. "Our hidden cities need clean water to survive, and your planet's marine life is connected to ours in ways you don't yet understand. Dr. Thompson will help establish research stations, where our scientists can work together to heal the damage done to both our worlds." Jake felt a warm sensation spreading through his entire body as the Queen spoke. The Zephyrian DNA in his blood was awakening, giving him new abilities and a deeper connection to both species. He would live much longer than a normal human, and he would be able to communicate telepathically with Zephyrian people 6 months later. Jake stood on the same beach where his life had changed for ever. Echo, now much stronger and more adapted to Earth, played in the waves with the other Zephyrian children. The research station had been expanded into a joint human-Zephyrian facility, where scientists from both species worked together to solve problems that neither could handle alone. Colonel Hayes had become one of Jake's closest allies, helping to establish secret protocols for contact between the two species. The military officer had been transformed by his encounter with Echo, and he now worked to protect the Zephyrian refugees rather than hunt them. Dr. Lisa Chen, Jake's old colleague, had finally been brought into the secret and now served as the Earthside coordinator for the joint research projects. She marveled daily at the advances they were making in marine biology, clean energy, and environmental restoration. But the most amazing change was in Jake himself. He had found his true purpose as a bridge between worlds, helping humans and Zephyrians learn from each other. The loneliness that had always been part of his life was gone, replaced by the warm knowledge that he belonged to something greater than himself. As Jake watched Echo teaching a group of human children how to communicate with dolphins using Zephyrian techniques, he realized that the Queen's test had been about more than just trust. It had been about discovering that love and understanding could literally change the DNA of the universe. The alien Queen had not just rewarded Jake with a new family and a greater purpose. She had given him the knowledge that he had always been part of something magnificent, and that the future held possibilities more wonderful than he had ever imagined. Echo ran up to Jake and hugged his legs, looking up at him with those beautiful starlight eyes that now seemed like looking into a mirror of his own soul. "Family," Echo said in perfect English, and Jake knew that word had never sounded more beautiful.